You might think your story looks like this. But what if I told you it actually looked like this? And all those little squares are moments throughout your story that have important jobs. And missing those jobs can make your story feel slow, confusing, or anticlimactic. In this mini course, we're talking all about story structure. The idea that your story can be split into crucial parts, so that no matter what kind of story you want to tell, it'll feel natural, impactful, and memorable. So, let's get started. This video is a lesson from a full free mega course on our website. If you're ready to supercharge your storytelling, click the link in the description and start your journey today. In the last mini course, we started by covering how we can visualize stories. Just to make sure we're all on the same page, let's recap. You can picture a story as a rectangle with the left as the start and the right as the end of your story. We spent the last mini course splitting this rectangle horizontally and covered how we can call these parts the A story and the B story. But now, let's imagine we split our rectangle vertically. This is the basis of story structure. Story structure is the idea that you can split your story into parts. These could be long phases or specific moments. But the important thing is why we're splitting our story. Well, story structuralists believe that each of these parts has a specific purpose. One part might introduce the protag, another could highlight the antag, and one could show the protag at their low point. When you put them all together, they make up your story. The idea has been around for a long time, especially in theater where shows were divided into sections called acts. But the modern story structure boom came when Professor Joseph Campbell wrote this book called The Hero with a Thousand Faces. The idea in it was simple. What if every great myth was made up of the same building blocks? This all-encompassing mythic structure was known as the monomyth, but you might know it as the hero's journey. We'll have a whole lesson on it later. When people started applying this idea to modern stories, they realized most of them used the same building blocks as well. This really picked up in Hollywood, where structuralists like Sid Field and Blake Snyder helped writers uncover these parts. And now, story structure has become one of the core ideas of writing. And even though some Luddites are still shaking their fists, it's now generally understood that stories have a structure, many of which are the same. There are two common ways people split up stories. The first is into phases, and the second is into moments. One division into phases you probably know is into three, with the first part being the beginning, the second being the middle, and the last being the end. These are also commonly called Act 1, Act 2, and Act 3. There are a ton of different names for these three phases, and we'll dive into them in our lesson on 3-act structure. Splitting a story into phases is the more general approach. It's more vague, but covers the whole story. For example, the purpose of the beginning might be to set up the protag and their world. Notice this is broad and doesn't get into the nitty-gritty, but it is still true. And it can still help us visualize our stories and make clearer decisions while writing. The other way of splitting up stories is into moments. One moment you probably know is the inciting incident, which is generally known as the event that sparks the start of your story. Splitting a story into moments is a much more detailed approach, but often struggles to describe what happens between these moments. For this reason, this approach can help make sure you include all your essential scenes, but will not help navigate you between them. We call any collection of these moments and or phases a story structure model. The hero's journey, for example, is a model. As a definition, a model is a collection of moments or phases that each have a specific purpose and are arranged in a specific order. And now, let's cover the most important part of this whole mini course, and probably the most important lesson you'll ever learn about story structure. Story structure is an incredibly powerful tool, but it is just that, a tool. It is not a set of rules. It is a way to help you understand the inner workings of your story, craft impactful narratives, and troubleshoot when your story feels off. A lot of people are at the extremes, either telling you that structure will ruin your story and make it formulaic, or worshipping structure like it's chiseled into gold tablets. But please hear us when we say, these are tools, not rules. Following them thoughtlessly is just as useless as writing them off. And the best writers use every tool at their disposal. If you or another writer is hesitant about story structure, it helps to think about it like this. Story structure is just a collection of the best rules of thumb for storytelling. These rules of thumb have developed for thousands of years and are at the core of the greatest stories ever told. For example, Saving the best for last is another way of describing the story climax, while not taking too long to start your story is another way of describing the inciting incident or the catalyst. So when we say most great stories follow the same structure, it's easy to dismiss it. But what we're really saying is that most great stories use the same powerful storytelling techniques, which is easier to agree with. Because story structure at its core is a collection of these storytelling techniques, these rules of thumb. And that's why it's so powerful. It's like condensing all the great writing tips, tricks, and hacks into one tool. So if you're ready to master the craft and understand stories on a deeper level, the next lessons in this mini course will cover 3-act structure, the hero's journey, and some other popular structure models. But if you want to learn more about the fundamentals of structure, the extended version of this lesson covers a brief example of why story structure is so good at creating stronger stories. See you there.